And Mr. Chairman, and to the minority, I first want to apologize to everyone. I have one of my crappy lung infections, so at some point I'm going to start coughing and doing an inhaler. Just ignore me. Somehow I thought that'd be funnier. Mr. Chairman, and to my good friend Mr. Beyer, this I think is somewhat of a unique opportunity for those of us from the Joint Economic Committee. We actually take math seriously. We don't always see things alike, but the fact of the matter is the Joint Economic Committee, I think started in 1956, has this remarkable history of some of the world's greatest economists coming and speaking before it and walking us through it. And that's why this moment, we're going to try to do something that's special. Instead of just sort of sharing feelings, I'm going to ask us to share math. And within that, we're going to walk through what's actually in the budget resolution. This is a reconciliation budget. It's not a regular budget. This is a budget that opens up the ability, because the insanity we go through of moving something through the Senate and it's 60 votes. So the 1974 Budget Control Act, this is the dance we go through. The other thing I'm going to try to walk through is where the actual math lays in the box that's been given to us by the Budget Committee. And then the part I'm going to do, the Schweikert little bit of hope, is this the moment? Is this the moment of policy that actually forces us, both the left and the right, so that if there's cuts, modernization, changes, updates in methodology of how we deliver services, is this the stressor that makes us do something that's hard, but also do something that's truthful? I'm also going to try repeatedly to make the point, Mr. Chairman, and show why are we primarily doing this. We have a handful, actually a bunch of provisions of the 2017 tax reform that begin to expire. Most of those provisions actually are the benefit of small businesses and the working class. And I will show that over and over, and the distributional effects. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in opposition to this budget resolution, and I yield such time as I may consume.
The gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, this budget is disastrous for the American economy. It will balloon our deficits, it will lead to higher interest rates, and will make the things Americans buy every day more expensive. It will slash critical investments in the things that make us healthier, safer, and more productive. Things like cancer research, aviation security, and our national park system. And it will decimate critical programs that support the people we represent, stripping health care from millions and make it harder for families to put food on the table and make ends meet. All of this for billionaires and corporations that get tax cuts they do not need and that our country cannot afford. I'm pleased to do this with my friend, Chairman Schweikert. I also believe in math, and I rarely brag, but I'm good at math. Americans have been clear. They want lower prices and an economy that works for them. Yet instead of focusing on making life easier for American families, at every turn, this administration and our Republican colleagues have engaged in a scorched earth policy. A policy that creates chaos across the country as the richest person on the planet eliminates services that our nation depends upon. My friend from South Carolina earlier said the policies would bankrupt our country. What's he mean? Health care for our families? Food for the working poor who overwhelmingly live in Republican districts? Sure, get rid of any identified bloat, as every president does. But this is a budget about billionaires, not about the every American women, men, and children we represent. Yes, I want to move towards a much smaller budget deficit. I listen to David Schweikert every closing afternoon during his special order hours. I hate the higher interest costs, but who pays? Our families or the 1,000 billionaires? That small percentage, 1% or less, of American population that has way more wealth than they could ever spend in lifetimes to come. You know, this budget depends on, my Republicans have long sung from the altar of fiscal responsibility, yet the plan they put in front of us today is a fiscal sacrilege. It depends on fantasy math. It ignores that their deficit-busting tax breaks will add at least $4.6 trillion on our nation's credit card, adding even more interest that our families must pay. And this interest has real costs. It slows economic growth. It depresses the standard of living. It leads to higher inflation and higher interest rates, and it makes it even harder for families already faced with high prices and borrowing costs to make ends meet. Wasteful, woke, and weaponized policies, my friend from Texas said, that's a very small percentage of the federal budget. You're going to never achieve what's in this budget resolution on wasteful, woke, and weaponized policies. So what is this Republican plan? How do they address? They double down on the policies that will widen the growing wealth gap this nation by giving billionaires trillions in handouts while providing pennies to the middle class. According to the Treasury Department, the top 1% of Americans, those making over $750,000 a year, can expect to get an annual tax cut of over $32,000. Working families will see a tiny fraction of that. Of course, the other main beneficiaries will be the wealthiest executives of the wealthiest corporations at a time when corporate profits are at an all-time high. Americans who rely on government services will be told they need to make sacrifices to pad those profit margins even further. How does that make any sense? To pay for these tax cuts for the ultra-wealthy, the Republican budget proposes to cut programs Americans rely on to afford health care and to put food on the table. Almost 100 million Americans, including seniors, children, families, and those from every corner of this country, depend on Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act to afford medical care. Yet this budget would slash almost $900 billion from these critical programs, ripping away life-saving coverage and raising health care costs for those who rely on them. And at a time when prices at the grocery stores continue to climb, this budget would make it even harder for the 40 million Americans who rely on SNAP to put food on the table. The budget we are considering today will nothing to support the economic growth of this nation. It will benefit the wealthiest at the expense of those who make this country work, and I urge my colleagues to reject it. With that, I reserve, Madam Speaker.
The gentleman from Virginia reserves. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. All right, I've got to figure out, do I sit here and just spend my time correcting things that are mathematically not true or not in the design of what's actually here, or just over and over say how much I like working with Mr. Byer as because one day you'll be the chair and I'll be in your position. So let's actually walk through some basic math together. What will our spending be this year? It will be $7 trillion. What is actually in the cuts, remember the horrible draconian cuts, is $120 billion in a year. So 7 trillion, a trillion is 1,000 billion for those of you who are math dysfunctional. Let's walk through. And 120 billion is the Armageddon. So let's actually have a little, and we're probably going to end up using these a couple times here because I think they make a point. The way a reconciliation budget is laid out, it creates a series of boxes. Here's all these authorizing committees. We need you to find savings. We need you to find those savings through modernization, through waste and fraud. And we're going to spend a little time actually talking about some great documents even the Biden administration produced on waste and fraud. And I'm sure every member here has actually read them and some of the other articles we have from Wall Street Journal doing on Medicare Advantage and all these others. And many of them, when all added up, are $1 trillion+ dollars. Are we capable of actually being intellectually honest and walking through? So one of the charts, and we're going to come back to this again, is you've been hearing the Armageddon being said, but it's Medicaid. Look, I used to do my state's Medicaid budgets. Now, Arizona has a somewhat unique system. We actually buy managed care, capitated policies for our indigent population, and it's remarkably effective. And we deliver remarkably effective health care cheaper than almost every other state in the country, demonstrating that actually plan design, managed design, actually can both be much healthier for our society and save money. But you don't actually start to have those revolutionary conversations in Congress until you have moments of stress like this. So once again, I just want to add, in the document, 96% of the budget authority within energy and commerce is not touched. We're talking 4% of their budget authority, and that's spread over a decade. If we can't find 4% of modernization in these programs, we're actually in much more trouble than even just the brain trust here as we tell our stories. And with that, Madam Chair, I reserve.
The gentleman from Arizona reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. While we're doing math, when I divide $2 trillion in savings and cuts over 10 years, I get $200 billion a year. With that, let me recognize the gentlelady from Massachusetts, the whip of the House Democratic Caucus, Ms. Clark.
How much time?
For 4 minutes, Madam Speaker.
The gentlewoman's recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Despite all the promises on the campaign trail, House Republicans have chosen to do 3 things with their majority: raise the cost of putting food on the table, raise the cost of getting health care, and use that money, deserving taxpayers' money, to cut billionaires' taxes. That's it. That's the agenda. And let's look at the scale of what they're sacrificing. Funding that feeds 15 million children, a program that pays for half of all the births in America, a service that keeps nursing homes and health centers' doors open, all to cut Elon's taxes. If that sounds outrageous to you, Madam Chair, and I sure hope it does, you are not alone. Let's be clear about the kind of money we're talking about. You know what it costs to keep a kid on Medicaid? $10 a day. How about keeping that child fed with SNAP benefits? $6 a day. What do Republicans want to give away to the already rich? $6 million per billionaire. Think about that. For a billionaire, $6 million is not even a rounding error. For a hungry child, it's enough to eat every single day for 34 lifetimes. Inflicting hunger on children to give billionaires money they don't need and won't even notice, there is no moral code under which that is acceptable. There is no public demand for it. There is no logical reason for it other than total fealty to billionaire donors, billionaires who will never feel they have enough. I'll close with a family that has been on my mind. A mom-to-be, 5 months pregnant. She and her husband are happy, they're in love, and they are excited for their daughter to arrive. But every month, their budget is tight. They get a little bit of help from food pantries, but sometimes, even if they arrive by 6 a.m., the food is already gone. Without the SNAP program, the mom said, I honestly don't know what we would do. Honestly, don't know what we would do. Every Republican has a choice to make with this vote. Will they vote to keep that mom and her daughter fed, or will they keep padding the pockets of those who will not even notice? The American people can forgive a lot, but they will not forgive this betrayal. I yield back.
Reserve.
The gentleman from Virginia reserves. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Look, I love public policy by storytelling, but this being the Joint Economic Committee, let's actually go back to math. And to Mr. Beyer, I want to make sure I'm communicating right, but at least we're down to, instead of the Armageddon, his number was, well, if you cut $2 trillion over 10 years, that's $200 billion. He's right, but that's actually not what's in the document here. It's functionally 1.2 with a shock absorber. Once again, I'll give you the shock absorber, depending on what Ways and Means ultimately does. So thank you again. I mean, it shows actually we're fairly close on math. Another thing, and this is just someone who actually had worked on the tax reform in 2017 and the storytelling that has existed, particularly with my brothers and sisters on the left. Madam Chairwoman, how would you feel if I could document to you that the post-2017 tax reform was more progressive? Now, there were lower rates, but the top portion of income earners actually were paying a higher percentage of federal income tax. So when you actually start looking at this, remember, and this is the distributional problem that I was going to try to walk through. I believe when you do the math here, 5% of the population, now these are people making stunning amounts of money. And if we want to have a discussion, should they pay more? Guess what? This opens up that discussion because there are no rates locked into this. It just creates the capacity to now have the discussion. But the fact of the matter, the top 5% pay 38% of all federal income taxes. Functionally half the workers in the United States pay less than 1%. And the bottom, and I'll take a correction if someone actually knows the actual number, I think the bottom 25% actually receives more because substantially earned income tax credit, which is the old negative income tax model. Look, we have a distributional problem. If you want to have a discussion of wealth and income equality, I have some great charts to show you of what inflation did, what the previous punctually 3.5 years of inflation did to wealth in the working class. When you inflate up people who have assets and you crush those who are trying to survive, congratulations. But remember, before the pandemic, under the TCJA, the tax reforms of 2017, it was the fastest closure of income inequality in American history. What's being discussed here is, do you allow those very tax benefits for small businesses, for individuals, to expire? Now, we don't get a huge economic pop from continuing them. You maintain consumption, but we know if you don't do them, that loss of consumption in those populations actually really hurts us economically. I'm going to reserve in a moment, but then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about some of the other provisions that we're just, once again, Madam Chair, just trying to create the capacity so we can actually have the more elegant debate of what should the distributional effects be? Where do we get the most economic growth from? And next time we're going to come back, let's actually do a bit of where the economic growth can come from, and we'll walk through what the model of expensing and those things. And with that, I reserve.
The gentleman from Arizona reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To add to the distributional impacts, the top 5% pay 38% of the taxes, but they have more than 60% of the wealth. The bottom 10% pay very little, but live hand to mouth, including more than 12% of our children. Madam Chair, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, the chairman, the distinguished chair of the House Democratic Caucus, Mr. Aguilar.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise in opposition to this Republican budget. House Democrats came to Congress ready to work with our Republican colleagues to lower the cost of eggs, take on price gouging, expand the child tax credit, build more housing, and put the pocketbooks of working families first. This is what the American people told us was their top priority. And these are the issues that drive our caucus. Instead, Madam Chair, they have turned their attention to the only policy priority that they really care about: ensuring billionaires pay less. My constituents can't afford eggs at the local grocery store, while my Republican colleagues are fighting amongst themselves about who to hand out tax breaks to, corporations or individuals. Tesla pays $0 in federal taxes, while teachers and firefighters in San Bernardino are paying more than their fair share. Here is the reality, Madam Chair. My Republican colleagues are going to take away health care from more than 10 million Californians to pay for tax cuts for billionaires. This is not going to make the cost of eggs cheaper or housing less expensive, but it is going to put children and seniors who need health care at risk. House Democrats believe that the people who work for a living ought to get a little breathing room, and the wealthy and well-connected shouldn't get special treatment. The Republican budget is not good for the economy, it's not good for the country, and it's a betrayal of the middle class. I urge a no vote.
The gentleman from Virginia reserves. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I actually made a board for what the gentleman's point was, showing that within this budget, this reconciliation budget document, how much additional tax cuts are there for C corporations? There's your board. Being a little sarcastic, but that's sort of a personality trait. The fact of the matter is, once again, the talking points don't match up with the reality here. Your taxes, everyone in this room, your taxes go up at the end of this year. If you run a small business, a pass-through, not a C corporation, a pass-through, your taxes go up. If you're part of an employee-owned company, so you've come together and you're managing yourselves almost like an employee co-op, your taxes go up. Now, what also do I hope, but I don't know if the capacity that this creates will allow us to do it, but I sure hope so. We have some great data, and I won't make you live through my charts, that show expensing. Research and development expensing and expensing. It has a cost in the 10-year window. Okay, hopefully everyone has listened to my dozens and dozens and dozens of speeches walking through what expensing is. Expensing is nothing more than depreciation. Do you take it in 1 year or, let's pretend, 7 years? But you still get the exact same amount of reduction in your taxes. It's a timing effect. The difference is if you can take it in the first year, if you do it over 7, you have to finance it. We actually have great economic modeling that shows when you do expense research and development, when you do expensing, you actually get a virtuous cycle of, well, we bought the piece of equipment, so we do it better, faster, cheaper. Well, our competitors just did it. The next year, we got to do it again. And that was one of the reasons, particularly pre-pandemic, we had that sudden spike of capital expenditures in productivity. The punchline on that is that actually does not exist now. It's fading out for those C corporations, which actually have their rates already locked in, but also for all those other small businesses to make those capital expenditures. Why is this really important? Well, there's lots of data that shows that part of the tax code actually does, from an economic growth standpoint, create incredible vitality. And it's a timing effect. It's the tyranny of living within a 10-year window in our models. I just hope that actually starts to actually elevate a little bit of the economics discussion instead of the storytelling. And with that, I reserve.
Gentleman from Arizona reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Madam Chair, I am thrilled to yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from Wisconsin, a distinguished member of both the Ways and Means Committee and the Joint Economic Committee, Ms. Moore.
The gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Mr. Beyer. You know, Republicans pretend to care about the nation's debt and annual deficits, but they have instructed Ways and Means to add $4.5 trillion to the debt to provide tax cuts to the wealthiest. Now, what we have heard from our Republican opponents here today, that if we don't pass this resolution, that everybody's taxes are going to be raised. Well, I'll tell you what. There will be crumbs from the master's table for the average American earning under $200,000 a year versus tax cuts for the wealthiest corporations and individuals. That is the math. I know how fond you are of math. That is the arithmetic. And let me tell you, the handouts to the wealthiest will come on the backs of the least of us. From affordable health care through the ACA and Medicaid, veterans health care, nursing home coverage, food assistance, student loan repayment options, energy tax credits, national security, cancer research. You all contend that the 78 million people voted for this. No, they did not. 15 seconds.
15 more seconds, Madam Chair.
No, 78 million people did not vote for this. Who do you think you are fooling? And they are not fooled by your notion that somehow these tax cuts are going to pay for themselves. And they're backed up by all kinds of economists, the CBO, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget.
Time has expired, and members are reminded to address their comments to the chair.
We reserve, please. Madam Chair.
The gentleman from Virginia reserves. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Madam Chair, average family, $2,853. That's your crumbs. I would argue for the average family that have been crushed by the previous 3-4 years in inflation. If you don't make 27% more money in my district, you are poorer today than you were 4 years ago. Having their taxes go up $2,853, and that's the average. And I promise you, I think in my district, it was closer to $3,300. I'm blessed to have a more prosperous district. That is not crumbs, Madam Chair. And with that, I reserve.
Gentleman from Arizona reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Madam Chair, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Illinois, a distinguished member of the Joint Economic Committee and our preeminent environmental economist.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I want you to imagine that a friend came over to you and said, Donald Trump taught me how to save 50% on my shoe purchases. All you got to do is cut off one leg. It's just math, as the gentleman from Arizona says. So let's get out the saw and head to Foot Locker. Now, if you were a good friend, you would tell them you're crazy and you need to stop thinking that Donald Trump likes you. But here we are today, talking about the idea that we're going to save money by gutting Medicaid, slashing food assistance, defunding white-collar law enforcement, the police, and exploding budget deficits so that we can do what Donald Trump told you he wants, give a $4.5 trillion tax cut to the wealthiest Americans. And so I would say to my Republican colleagues, as a friend, Donald Trump doesn't like you. He doesn't really like anybody. He just assumes that you will never find the courage to stand up to him, so he's going to keep asking you for more until you finally do. If you are sick of being bullied, if you're ready to act like the leaders you claim to be and make sure that we leave this country in a little better shape than we found it, grow a spine and vote hell no on this budget resolution. I yield back.
I reserve.
Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the president. Gentleman from Virginia reserves. The gentleman from Arizona.
Madam Chair, may I inquire into time? I may need you to go more.
The gentleman from Arizona has 16 and a half minutes remaining. The gentleman from Virginia has 18 minutes remaining.
Okay. Madam Chair, I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Arizona reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Madam Chair, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Illinois, the distinguished ranking member of the China Select Committee, Mr. Krishnamurthy.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today as the ranking member of the Select Committee on the Strategic Competition with the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, to express serious concerns about the proposed cuts in the Republicans' budget resolution. First, the resolution includes $880 billion in cuts to programs that risk stalling the advancement of technologies crucial to our competition with the CCP. Second, these cuts will likely jeopardize our ability to enforce critical export controls with the Chinese, as well as gutting programs that help us reshore manufacturing from China. While we got to restore our fiscal house, these cuts to critical programs amount to the GOP's perverted version of DEI, devastating, extreme, and irresponsible. The CCP is cheering for the GOP budget resolution tonight. I object.
I yield. Reserve,
The gentleman from Virginia reserves. The gentleman from Arizona
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
is recognized.
Hey, can you believe this, Madam Chairwoman and my friend, Mr. Beyer? We broke our printer. But thank heaven we didn't break the markers. So I thought actually just because we're doing we're trying to do fact-based, the average family, your taxes are going up at the end of this year, $2,853, and 62% of taxpayers 62% of taxpayers will see hikes. And and I'm sorry we just didn't have time to make a much prettier chart for everyone. Remember, after 2017, we actually moved up, but some of that was some of the deductions and things were added. We moved up the threshold, so almost the half of our tax-paying population actually didn't pay income taxes. They still had payroll taxes and FICA and those things. A bunch of that population that has not paid taxes in years and years and years will be getting tax bills with the opposition to this. Madam Chair, I'm going to reserve, and then we'll come back and go over more.
Gentleman from Arizona reserved. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Madam Chair, I yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from New York, the distinguished ranking member of the Administration Committee, Mr. Morelli.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the distinguished gentleman.
The gentleman's recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank my friend, the gentleman from Virginia, for giving me time. I rise today in strong opposition to this budget resolution. As an Appropriations Committee member, thoughtful consideration of government spending is a responsibility I don't take lightly. I believe every hard-earned taxpayer dollar must work for all Americans, not fuel widely irresponsible economic theory. I'd like to think my colleagues on the other side of the aisle believe the same thing, given the rhetoric we've all heard over the last several years. So I encourage the American people to watch what House Republicans do, not what they say. Remarkably, instead of lowering costs, this reckless budget resolution bestows tax cuts for the wealthiest 1% of Americans while jeopardizing essential health care and nutrition programs. For this reason, I strongly oppose the budget resolution authored by House Republicans. Shockingly, gutting programs our communities rely on isn't harmful enough, because this resolution will also require taxpayers to borrow another $1.6 trillion over the next 10 years. Our nation's founders vested in the House of Representatives a unique set of powers to make it responsive to the will of the people. The father of our Constitution, James Madison, said the House should have immediate dependence on and intimate sympathy with the people. House Republicans demonstrate no dependence on nor sympathy with the American people. I urge my colleagues to reject this handout to millionaires and billionaires and work on a budget that instead advances the interests of American families. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
The gentleman from Virginia reserves. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Madam Chair, once again, here's the budget document. Here's the spreadsheets. I keep hearing you're giving away to billionaires. Where's that? Where is it? Madam Chair, it doesn't exist because this is a box. This is a box that allows us, and understand, I am passionately concerned about debt and deficits. But this may be, for an idiot like myself, the first opportunity where members of leadership and those are ready to allow people like me to come in and walk through how we can improve, change the costs of how we deliver services. And we need this type of document to do it. And you deal with the reality of what we're allowed to touch. You do realize the majority of mandatory spending, we're not even allowed to touch in a budget reconciliation because it's interest in Medicare is the majority. And every day we wait to modernize, we're in that much more trouble. Last thing before I do a yield here. We're going to spend $86 trillion, and I'm partially doing this off the top of my head, over the next decade. This budget reconciliation, we're hoping to get, let's say we're blessed, we get $2 trillion offsets, so that creates a couple trillion in additional borrowing. You're talking a fraction, a couple percent of the spending. I would argue this is the moment for us where it's not about cuts. If any of you have ever just even bothered to look at the MedPAC reports and this was done by the Biden administration, we have potentially over a decade, hundreds of billions in here that aren't going to services, aren't going to make our brothers and sisters healthier. Help us. Help us engage the morality of doing this better, faster, and cheaper. And Madam Chair, I yield to the majority leader, and, I yield to, that's right, I yield to the gentleman from California, Mr. Valadao.
And how many minutes to Mr. Valadao? 1 minute?
2 minutes.
Well, I thank the gentleman.
2 minutes. Mr. Valadao from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from Arizona. I also like to thank the leader, Scalise, for his time today. We have a historic opportunity to advance the key priorities of this administration with a one-bill solution. And I fully agree we need to move forward in a way that reflects the needs of the American people. This budget resolution unlocks the next step in the reconciliation process to deliver on our priorities. That includes extending key provisions of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, like doubling the standard deduction, expanding the child tax credit, and maintaining the death tax exemption. These policies make a real difference for working families, farmers, and small business owners, and allows them to keep more of their hard-earned money. We also need to fulfill our commitment of securing our border, strengthening our economy, and rooting out fraud, waste, and abuse. It is my understanding, after this resolution passes, House leadership will be working with the Senate to come to an agreement on reconciliation language so that the committees can begin drafting specific policies to achieve the administration's agenda. There's been a lot of political rhetoric about what this upcoming budget resolution does and does not do, and I want to be clear on where I stand. As a representative of one of the most agriculturally rich districts in the country, it's my constituents who are responsible for putting food on everyone's tables. My district also has one of the highest Medicaid populations in the nation. I've heard from countless constituents who tell me the only way they can afford health care is through programs like Medicaid, and I will not support a final reconciliation bill that risks leaving them behind. Medicaid cuts are deeply unpopular with the American families who sent us here to deliver on President Trump's agenda. I understand Medicaid is not explicitly named in this bill, but achieving $880 billion in budget cuts within ENC's jurisdiction would be really is not an easy task. So I ask that leadership remains committed to working with my colleagues and I to produce a final product that strengthens critical programs like Medicaid and SNAP and ensures that our constituents are not left behind.
Would the gentleman yield?
I yield to the gentleman from Louisiana.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. I want to thank the gentleman from California and the Central Valley for his passion. He's been a vocal advocate for the things that are necessary to keep these programs like Medicaid strengthened. And as we know, so many of these programs are weakened right now.
The gentleman's time has expired. 30 seconds. Someone from Arizona yield additional time to Mr. Valadao.
30 seconds.
Madam Chair, yield another
30 seconds.
30 seconds to the gentleman from California.
The gentleman from Louisiana was speaking, so I'll recognize the gentleman from Louisiana.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And as I was saying, the gentleman from the Central Valley has been so passionate about this issue. And as we move this through the process, he surely has my commitment and all of leadership that we'll continue to not only listen to him, but his district is going to have a very loud voice as this process moves forward to protect and make sure that people who are on these programs, who are deserving, who need these programs, are going to, frankly, we all ought to be focused on getting better services to these people and rooting out the waste, fraud, and abuse. That's what we're focused on, protecting those people who are on these programs, who need them so desperately, as Mr. Valadao has fought for years to deliver, and he will continue to do that. We absolutely commit to that for him and others. I yield back. to the gentleman from
The
California.
gentleman from Arizona reserved. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from New York, the distinguished ranking member of the Small Business Committee, Ms. Velasquez.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the gentleman for yielding. I rise today in strong opposition to this Republican riposte. This budget slashes $880 billion from Medicaid, putting 286,000 people in my district, including nearly 100,000 children, at risk of losing health care. Madam Chair, cruelty is the point. It also targets food assistance, leaving over 147,000 New Yorkers in my district struggling to afford meals. Cruelty is the point. And why? All this to hand out trillions of dollars in tax breaks to the top 1%. Republicans tried to this trick before in 2017. They promised it will raise wages, pay for itself, and boost the economy. It didn't. Instead, it made the rich richer while working people fell further behind. Now they are doubling down, making America sicker, poorer, and hungrier, just to funnel more money to their billionaire donors.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
Republican responsibility is economic cruelty. Vote no.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from Virginia reserves. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Economic literature, and I think even the board here demonstrated that if we go back to the original TCJA, those corporate tax cuts, over 70% show up in wages. That's one of the reasons there was such remarkable wage growth without inflation. If you care about workers, you get tax policy correct. And with that, Madam Chair, I'd like to yield 60 seconds, a magic 60 seconds, to the leader.
The majority leader, the gentleman from Louisiana, is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank my friend from Arizona for yielding for 1 minute. I rise in strong support, first of all, of this budget resolution. It's a critically important piece of legislation. Frankly, might be one of the most important resolutions that this chamber has taken up in years to start the process of delivering on the mandate that President Trump and this House and Senate Republican majority got from the voters of America in November. Now, I understand that my friends on the other side of the aisle are upset with the voters of America that they lost the election. They're upset with the results. But if everybody here listened to what the American people said in November, frankly, first of all, they would vote for this resolution because the resolution delivers on those commitments, the things that were talked about, the things that sent people to the polls that say, finally, let's get America back on track. And how do we do it? We start, number one, by staving off a $4.5 trillion tax increase. $4.5 trillion. So we've heard a lot of hyperbole over the last few days. Just here on this House floor, we've heard from the other side of the aisle, Madam Chair, about millionaires and billionaires. For some reason, it seems like if somebody's successful in America, the other side of the aisle wants to demonize them, as if that's wrong. But clearly, if you read this bill is not about millionaires and billionaires. This bill is about whether or not you're going to stand up for the middle class of America, who will be devastated if this bill fails. A lot of times when we come to the House floor, Madam Chair, you can vote for or against a bill. And maybe the bill does good things, maybe you think the bill does bad things, and if you vote against the bill, nothing happens. And some days, nothing happening is a good day. Today, if nothing happens, it's not nothing that happens. A no vote. And let's be clear, you've got options, Madam Chair. You can vote yes to pass this resolution and get this process of budget reconciliation started, or you can vote no, like all of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle brag they're going to do. So if that's the case, Madam Chair, and maybe I can persuade a few because maybe they don't know this, because clearly they haven't read the bill. You hear them talking about Medicaid over and over and over again, cuts to Medicaid, cuts to Medicaid. Clearly, they haven't read the bill, because if you read the bill, the word Medicaid is mentioned a total of 0 times in the bill. 0. But that's all they want to talk about. If you read the bill, you would talk about what this does to engage 11 different committees in this Congress, 11 committees, to start a process called budget reconciliation, where they will go into open hearings on C-SPAN. Everybody in America can watch the deliberations, where there will be a discussion about how to get this country back on track, which the people of this nation are hungering for. Not people yelling and screaming and telling lies and trying to scare people with false information. We are here to talk facts. And the facts are a no vote imposes $4.5 trillion in taxes that primarily hit middle and low income families, not the millionaires and billionaires that they seem to want to demonize. You know, we're trying, for example, and you heard President Trump at every rally talk about no tax on tips. Now, clearly the other side of the aisle was against that. They wanted everybody's taxes to go up. They said they were against renewing the Trump tax cuts, let alone adding things like no tax on tips. And so we know they were against making sure that those people that work for tips don't have to pay taxes on it. Well, who are those people that work for tips? Last time I checked, Elon Musk does not work for tips, Madam Chair. The billionaires aren't the ones working for tips. In fact, we went back and checked. There's over 6 million Americans in this country, 6 million, that actually do work for tips. And what is their average salary, Madam Chair? Is it $1 million? Is it tens of millions? Is it $1 billion? No. In fact, the average salary for tip workers is $32,000 a year. That's who we're helping in this bill. If you vote no, you're saying to those tip workers who are struggling, some of them may be working 2 or 3 jobs. They're not the millionaires and the billionaires. They might actually be able to take a family vacation for the first time if they don't have to pay tax. If the 87,000 new IRS agents that they created in the last administration are not unleashed on them to go audit them, to try to make them pay more money on their tip money, which is what is happening, we say no, they shouldn't have to pay taxes on those tips, Madam Chair. And the other side of the aisle says no to that. And they hide behind Elon Musk. They hide behind billionaires and millionaires. Except it's not the millionaires and billionaires that we're trying to help. They want to confuse the voters of this country so that when they vote no, the middle class of America doesn't realize in revolt that they just voted with their no vote to impose a $4.5 trillion tax hike on the middle class of this country. Look at the big number. Every income level tax goes up. You pay income taxes in America. If the other side of the aisle, Madam Chair, votes no, everybody's income tax rate goes up in America. But who are those folks? 145 million families. Not 145 million people. I'm talking about 145 million families in America who make less than $1 million. Will see their taxes go up. Go up. A tax increase, not on the millionaires and billionaires, if they vote no, but it's a tax increase primarily on middle and lower income families. Why aren't they telling us that? Why haven't they said that on this House floor? Because they don't want the American people to know the truth. They want to create class warfare and try to divide the country against itself. Shame on people who want to divide this country even more. It's time we unite this country and grow this country, grow the middle class, actually create more jobs and wealth and opportunity, which, by the way, as Mr. Schweikert pointed out earlier, and he's got the charts to prove it, wealth and opportunity for lower and middle income families is what happened in 2017 and beyond when we started with the Trump tax cuts. And just because they don't like the person whose name is behind those tax cuts, they want to try to demonize them. But the facts still remain. Who benefited the most? The low and the middle income. We were losing our middle class in America in the decade before we passed those tax cuts. Why? Go look at the record, the facts. We were losing great American company after great American company moving out of America. They were leaving the country. Why? We had the highest corporate tax rate in the world. Now, the other side would say, stick it to them even more, raise tax rates even more. By the way, there are laboratories of democracy where that's been tried. It's called New York and California. And every time they keep raising rates, what happens? People move in droves. Million-plus people have left those states to go to other states. Texas, Florida, Tennessee, that have no income tax. So sure, you're seeing it happen in America, but what happens if they destroy America's system? Where do you go? Well, some of those people left America. Madam Chair, we don't want that to happen. We actually brought companies back. Great, recognized. You would know the logos of all of them if we put them up. There's too many to mention. That had left America over years and years, and nobody did anything about it. Everybody knew why it was happening. And so we made our country competitive again. How? By lowering tax rates. Now, everybody should have been for that. Unfortunately, their party back then, the Democrat Party, said, we're going to vote no on that. Every single Democrat voted no. Why did they make it an issue, a partisan issue? I don't know, but I know this. When we lowered those tax rates to make America competitive, we're a global competing economy. Our companies in America don't just compete against the person down the street. They're competing against companies all over the globe, and we should applaud that. We shouldn't just applaud it, by the way. We should make sure they remain the most competitive businesses in the world. America remains the most competitive country in the world, but we weren't. We were not. That's why we were losing people. Imagine people saying, I'm going to leave the United States of America, greatest country in the history of the world, because our country stopped being competitive. And we finally did something about it. This Republican majority in 2017 did something about it and finally brought those jobs back and brought wages up. Wages grew for everybody. Companies were giving out bonuses, pay raises. Our unemployment rate went to virtually zero. Those are the facts. And so they want those tax rates to go up. Not all of them expire. The corporate rate remains, by the way, competitively low at 21%. The corporate rate stays at 21. You know what doesn't stay low? If they vote no, and I'm a yes vote, because I want our country to be competitive. I want our small businesses to be able to be competitive with big businesses. They love beating up on the big guy, but guess what they're going to do? And let's look at the facts. Anybody who votes no on this bill, Madam Chair, will tell every small business in America, it's a provision of the tax code called 199A. And if you're not a small business, you've probably never heard of 199A. But you know what? If you are a small business, a 20-person mom and pop shop on Main Street, America, anywhere in this country, 199A is your lifeblood. Why? Because that's what allows you as a small business, a 10, 15, 20-person American dream story. You started your own business. But you can now compete and pay the same tax rate as the big global multinational corporation, who's at 21. But what happens, Madam Chair, if they vote no? And again, the no vote does not mean nothing happens. If you vote no, you are saying you want the small business now to go from a 21% effective rate to as high as 43% taxes. So think about this. You're the mom and pop small business, and you're barely hanging on. You've beaten all the internet competitors, and you're still being able to hold on to those jobs. You know, show up at work every day. Employ the 20 people, the 15 people that you're creating jobs for. If the other side gets their way, you jack up to 43% tax rate when your competitor, the big global billionaire corporation, is still at 21. That's what happens if they vote no. Why haven't they said that during the debate? I haven't heard it yet. Again, all you hear about is the billionaires and the millionaires are the ones getting all the breaks. Except it's not true, Madam Chair. It's just not true. Every small business in America gets kicked in the gut if this fails. Every small business in America. And look at the numbers. You're talking about over 20 million small businesses. Think of how many workers that is. Do they just want to kick all those workers out to the street, to the unemployment rolls? Because if you're paying 43% and your competitor's paying 21%, you don't need a math degree to figure out how quickly you're not going to be able to compete. We made them competitive in 2017. Why does the other side want to vote no and all of a sudden make every small business in America uncompetitive with the big billionaires? They're defending the billionaires, Madam Chair. This is insanity. But that's the reality of what happens if you vote no. And again, maybe by me going through the actual details, we might convince a couple of folks that maybe somebody duped them. They gave them some talking points. You just mention the word millionaire and billionaire, and next thing you know, you got a parade of 200 people that'll just line up and bash the bill. Except it's not in the bill. Do you want to stand up for the middle-class families of this country? Vote yes on the bill, because that's who we're defending. Republicans are going to defend the ability for the next billionaire company maybe, but right now it's a dream in somebody's basement. This is what's great about America. And if you haven't, go look at your favorite company. Go look at the biggest companies. Most of them started with the dream in somebody's garage in Silicon Valley. I know a lot of entrepreneurs who started with great ideas and risked it all over and over again, and then ultimately they might have hit it big. But the only way they were able to hit it big is because they had the ability in the United States of America to turn that dream into a reality where now all of a sudden they might hire 300 people. We ought to applaud that. We ought to celebrate that. We ought to make sure that remains in place. The day we take away that ability in the United States, God help us as a country. Because the few people that still want that dream, but they don't have America to go to pursue it, they might go to other places, but there just aren't that many other places in the world to pursue it. We cannot crush the American dream of America. It starts with strengthening the middle class and the lower income families' ability to compete with the big guys so that one day maybe they can be. And then they too will be demonized by the other side. But in the meantime, give them that ability to compete fairly, and you take that away if you vote no on this bill. Facts. Those are the facts. Whose rates go up, whose rates don't if this bill fails. That's where we are. And I do think it's important one more time just to go through the facts of the 2017 bill, because so many lies have been told about that. The poverty rate dropped to the lowest level in history. Again, this isn't the millionaires and billionaires. When we passed the bill in 2017 that every Democrat voted no on, the poverty rate in America dropped to its lowest rate in history. Unemployment hit a 50-year low. And lower income workers, not the millionaires and billionaires, lower income workers saw their wages grow substantially faster than the highest 10% of income earners. So whose side are you going to be on today? We're going to give everybody an opportunity. Stand up for those hardworking people who want their shot at the American dream. Stand up for that waiter or waitress who's working their tail off tonight, who's going to come home and go, wait a minute, I might not have to pay taxes on my tips. I can save that money and for the first time start a college fund for my kid, because it's not the millionaires and the billionaires that benefit from that. It's the average income worker, millions of them, by the way, the average income of $32,000 a year. That's who we're fighting for. That's who House Republicans are fighting for. And we're going to deliver for them because that was the mandate that the people of this country gave us. Whether you agree or not, whether you like Donald Trump or not, Donald Trump ran on very specific things, and he's delivering on those things. And I applaud President Trump for actually following through on the promises that were made. Promises made and promises kept actually matter in this town, and they're rare. And when it happens, we ought to applaud it. When this majority actually delivers, we're going to see on that board real soon who actually stands with the 77 million people of this country who said, we want this change. We demand this change. We're going to go to the polls to vote for this change. Let's preserve the American dream. Yes, at the risk of offending a couple of people, I'm fine with saying let's make America great again, because America deserves to be great again. Don't put a $4.5 trillion tax on the middle class of this country. Let's let this country grow. Let's see the opportunity flourish. We will do it. We need to pass this bill to start that process. I urge all of my colleagues to vote yes, Madam Chair. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Louisiana, Yields back. The gentleman from Arizona reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Madam Chair, I yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from Oregon, distinguished member of the Educational Workforce Committee, Ms. Bonamici.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Byer. Madam Chair, last week I had 5 town hall meetings across Northwest Oregon in urban, suburban, and rural areas, and not one person, not one of the thousands who attended asked me to support a budget that cuts Medicaid, gives tax breaks to the wealthiest, raises the cost of living, or undermines safety and security, but that's what we're voting on today. The Republicans are stealing the hard-earned tax dollars of Oregonians and Americans to line the pockets of people like Elon Musk. This ruthless Republican budget will rip away health care from low-income and working families and children and take us back to the days where if you get sick, you either go without treatment or you go bankrupt. It could rip away resources from local schools and prevent children, especially students with disabilities, from getting a good education. Republicans say they're eliminating waste. Want to talk about waste? Waste is giving the wealthiest big tax cuts while regular Americans are struggling to put food on the table. The cost of groceries is increasing, wages continue to remain stagnant, and too many families can't afford housing or childcare. The Republican majority's answer? Rip you off and give tax breaks to the wealthiest, and then hope, unrealistically, that it's going to trickle down. We must oppose this Republican billionaire budget. We must focus instead on the American people so everyone, not just those at the top, have the opportunity for a better future. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from Virginia is reserves, and the gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Madam Chair, may I inquire into the time?
The gentleman from Arizona has 9 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Virginia has 13 and a half minutes remaining.
Madam Chair, I reserve.
Gentleman from Arizona reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Madam Chair, I yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from California, the ranking member of the Veterans Affairs Committee, Mr. Takano.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
I thank the gentleman from Virginia for yielding. Madam Speaker, as the ranking member of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs, I rise today in complete opposition to the Republican rip-off budget resolution. Let's be clear. This is a tax break for billionaires like Elon Musk, paid for by working people, including millions of our veterans. The Republican rip-off cuts at least $880 billion from Medicaid, the program that 80 million Americans, including 9 million veterans, rely on for health insurance coverage. This extreme budget also cuts $230 billion from SNAP. Every year, SNAP helps almost 43 million Americans, including over 1 million veterans, put food on the table. But Republicans aren't just going to leave American veterans without health care or make them go hungry. They also want to take a chainsaw to VA, attacking the very people who provide care to the veterans who've served our country with honor. This is completely unacceptable, and I urge every member to oppose this abomination of a resolution that uses veterans as a piggy bank to pay for a billionaire tax break. I yield back.
The gentleman from Virginia reserves. The gentleman from Arizona reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Madam Chair, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Nevada, a distinguished member of the Ways and Means Committee, Mr. Horsford.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, and to the gentleman for yielding. I rise today not in favor or opposition. I rise in defense. Defense of 811,000 Nevadans and countless people across the country whose lives are in danger. I rise in defense of my constituents who will be impacted if Republicans are able to slash their health care services to fund $4.5 trillion to the ultra-wealthy and to big corporations. Madam Chair, Nevada Democrats and Republicans worked together to implement the Affordable Care Act, including the expansion of Medicaid. We reduced the uninsured rate by 1/3. 563,000 children were able to receive coverage as a result. But the fact that Nevada did the right thing then means we have more to lose as Republicans do the wrong thing now. Our state would be the third hardest hit, including in rural communities. This isn't a budget, it's the Republican Screw America bill. That's why I'm calling on every member of this body to vote no. I will in defense of my constituents.
The gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Virginia reserves. Gentleman from Arizona reserves. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Madam Chair, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New York. Distinguished member of the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Espaillat.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very often we take very serious votes on this floor. But this vote is a deadly serious vote. This is a vote about life and death. I represent just slightly over 780,000 constituents. Out of those 780,000 constituents, 524,000 of them are Medicaid recipients. 524,000 of them. Over 100,000 of them are Medicare recipients. So over 600,000 of the 780,000 constituents that I represent receive either Medicaid or Medicare. In addition to that, there are 263,000 households that receive food stamp. This bill will put their life and health in danger, Madam Speaker. This is about life and death. As the Republican majority proposes to cut Medicaid across this country, to give a massive $4.5 trillion, with a capital T, trillion dollar cut in taxes to the very rich. And who will that go to? 50% of that will go to the shareholders. 44% of that tax cut will go to high-end executive. The fat cat executives are going to get this money, and working class and even middle class people are going to get stiffed with the cuts. And this is about life and death. It's not a simple piece of legislation that we will pass. There are diabetics that will see the price of insulin go up. There are people with renal problems, with cardiovascular problems. Madam Speaker, this is about life and death. Vote no for this bill, and I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Virginia reserves. The gentleman from Arizona reserves. The gentleman from Arizona.
Madam Chair, let me have just a couple moments of joy here. A reconciliation budget that only touches individuals and pass-through businesses, so there are no shareholders who are getting, that's actually already locked in. That's one of the reasons we're doing this, is because you want to see distortions in the economy, have a world where small businesses, pass-throughs, employee-owned, their taxes shoot up. But the C corporations are down here. What distortion did you just create in the world? I'm a C corporation. I'm buying everyone else. You want to see the big get bigger? It's one of the reasons you have to do this. But also, I beg my brothers and sisters, have a different view, but actually just try to get the most basic facts correct here. And with that, Madam Chair, I reserve.
Gentleman from Arizona reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Madam Chair, I yield 1.5 minutes to the gentlelady from New Mexico, a distinguished and unenviable member of the Rules Committee, Ms. Ledger Fernandez.
The gentlewoman from New Mexico is recognized.
Republicans are attacking women's ability to afford life as a mom or a daughter. Medicaid supports more than 40% of all births in the United States. Our grandmothers and parents in nursing homes rely on Medicaid to pay their health bills. Their caregivers, who are mostly women, depend on Medicaid themselves. Over 37 million children rely on Medicaid and CHIP. Republicans would strip this essential health care from women across the country. Why?
to give tax breaks to their billionaire bros. Women need to know how they will be impacted wherever they live. Earlier today, we heard Representative Valadao acknowledge that his voters depend on Medicaid and are upset. Indeed, 507,000 of his constituents receive Medicaid, but he said he will vote yes on the bill. I need women across the country to visit the Democratic Women's Caucus website to find out how these cuts will impact them. How will the Republicans give billionaires and millionaire tax cuts on their economic pain? Republicans should stand with their moms and not the billionaires.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Virginia reserves. The gentleman from Arizona.
Madam Chairwoman.
Recognized.
So, apparently the Democrat position is the $2,000 you get per child, which was the doubling of the child tax credit in 2017, should go away and go back to the $1,000. Wow. Because I think that's what I just heard. So those of us who've adopted kids, those who have children, congratulations. Your child tax credit is going to get cut in half. Reserve.
Gentleman from Arizona reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That is, with respect to my friend from Arizona, that is not what I heard. We heard that this budget resolution is put together, promises cuts that we are desperately afraid of. When we do the math, people who count on, in Congressman Schweikert's district, Arizona 1, people who count on SNAP to put food on the table are 85,000. Medicaid recipients at risk of losing their health care, 127,000. And Affordable Care Act recipients to see their premium payments go up by varying amounts, 44,000. We'd love to see a budget work out that somehow gives the lie to those frightening numbers. With that, Madam Chair, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, a distinguished member of the Joint Economic Committee, Mr. Min.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise today in opposition to the disastrous GOP budget resolution. This bill seeks to cut $3 trillion in spending, supposedly by targeting waste and fraud. But the entire domestic discretionary budget is only $917 billion. The math simply doesn't add up. There's only one way to get to $3 trillion in cuts, and that's to slash lifeline programs, including nearly $1 trillion in cuts to Medicaid. Under the GOP budget, over 136,000 of my constituents would lose their health care, including over 42,000 children. This budget would also take food away from hungry children, deny health care to sick veterans. So why are House Repubs pushing such an immoral and cruel agenda? Not to reduce our deficits. In fact, their budget adds nearly $1.6 trillion a year to our debt. No, it's to pass tax cuts for billionaires and foreign investors. In fact, over $350 billion of these same tax cuts went to foreign investors over the last 10 years. Let's be clear. If this budget passes, kids are going to go to bed hungry so that we can give more money to Elon Musk and investors from Saudi Arabia, China, and Russia. This is immoral. It's wrong. I urge my colleagues to oppose this horrible budget measure.
Gentleman's time has expired. The
Reserve.
Gentleman from Virginia reserves.
Madam Chair, reserve.
The gentleman from Arizona reserves. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Madam Chair, yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from New Mexico, a distinguished member of the Agriculture and Armed Services Committee, Mr. Vasquez.
The gentleman's recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I thought Republicans' plans were to make Americans' lives better. I thought we were supposed to lower the cost of goods. I thought we were supposed to make health care more affordable for Americans. Well, let me tell you this. When you strip health care away from 290,000 New Mexicans, many of which are in my district, 132,000 children and 26,000 seniors, can anybody on the other side of the aisle tell me how is that making life better for my constituents and for New Mexicans? Well, it's not going to. And in fact, this Republican budget is going to raise health care premiums by nearly $1,000 a year for 20,000 people in my district. It could force a 60-year-old couple to pay over $16,000 more annually for coverage. Now, in my district and in my state, we have some of the best service records of veterans in this entire country. In fact, we are home to the code talkers. We are home to folks who have served our country with pride and with dignity for so many years that when I look at the cuts that are being made to the VA healthcare system. I'm ashamed of what this body is doing. I'm ashamed of what my colleagues across the aisle are doing. And when I go home and I talk to a working mother, I talk to a person who works every day, wakes up at 7 in the morning and works 2 jobs and has to send their kid to school and relies on the food programs just to keep their family healthy, just to have something in the stomach of that 7-year-old who is going to first grade, and to know that their food assistance programs could get taken away. We're doing the exact opposite of what Republicans promised that they would do for this country. This budget is a statement of where we're at as a country, and this is the wrong statement that we need to be making. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman from Arizona.
Mr. Chair, may I inquire once again on time?
The gentleman has 7.5 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Virginia has 4.5 minutes remaining.
Mr. Chair, just as having hearing some of my Democrat colleagues, I was just thumbing through the actual document. I know this is crazy and literacy being sort of a lost art, but I'm trying to find where this heresy, these cuts, now look, there's a discussion here that basically says we need not to just purely stick this on the debt and deficit. Okay, but like in the E&C instruction, which is energy and commerce for, I think it's 4% of their area of authorization. You're telling me after the hundreds of hours idiots like me have come behind this microphone and done presentations showing the distortions, the waste and fraud, the misallocation, the lack of use of technology, the duplications, you can't produce 4%? Why is the left so terrified of the moment where maybe a document that forces us in some ways to listen to each other, to maybe how do we do this better, faster, and cheaper? Because I'm going to say this 3 or 4 more times. Does the left really want to raise taxes on the average American family $2,853? Is that the plan here? Because this is 63% of those who are tax filers will see their taxes go up. Is that the plan here? Mr. Chair, reserve.
Mr. Chairman, let me just respond to my good friend from Arizona. No, that is not what Democrats want. We don't want to see taxes go up for average middle-class Americans at all. But this is what our budget experts say based on the budget resolution before us, is that it will, as my friend Mr. Schweikert knows well, to achieve significant cuts, the kind of cuts that you're talking about, inevitably we have to look at Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security. We look at the fact that in Virginia, just eliminating Medicaid Advantage is 660,000 Virginians. We look at Medicare, 46% of the children in America receive their health care through Medicaid. And then we look at Medicare, it's beyond belief what that would do. I am looking forward to somehow seeing how you achieve the massive budget cuts that are in this resolution without touching those. That's why you've heard so much concern today about what this will do to the average American people. It's not that we don't want to revisit not raising taxes on the American public. We also just don't want to cut away their health care, their SNAP benefits, their ability to put food on the table, and the like. And Mr. Chair, I am ready to close when my distinguished chair of the Joint Economic Committee tells me it's time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Arizona.
Mr. Chairman, just because I want to help out, because I know this is heresy around here, truly one of my favorite members to work with, even though we're on different sides of the aisle. You may want to retract the word Social Security, which you just said, because you know Social Security cannot be allowed in any of this package.
Happy to retract it.
And with that, I reserve.
Mr. I also noticed that our anxiety about Social Security will not go away.
Oh, no, and who else has been working for a decade now to save it? Because remember, in 2033, about halfway through the year, the trust fund is gone. And is that a Republican or Democrat problem? I would say it's a morality problem. We will be doubling senior poverty in America in 8 years. And how often are we allowed to come talk about it? With that, Mr. Chair, I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Virginia.
Mr. Chair, I'm ready to close. And in doing so, let me first begin that my good friend John Larson on the Ways and Means Committee has for years promoted Social Security 2100, which would actually fix it for the rest of this century. Mr. Chairman, President Trump and the Republican majority were elected last November to deliver on a simple promise to lower costs for Americans. Unfortunately, this budget does not do that. My Republican friends have decided that providing billions of dollars in tax breaks for a few millionaires and billionaires is worth ordinary Americans bearing, as Elon Musk put it last year, some temporary hardship. That hardship brought about this budget will come in many forms and may not mean much to the richest man in history, but will certainly mean a lot to ordinary people. It will grow our debt by $4.6 trillion. It will lead to higher interest rates and raising prices on goods that Americans pay every day. And it will cut crucial government services that keep us safe, healthy, and productive. And it will strip health care and food assistance from tens of millions of Americans who are already struggling to make ends meet. And what are Americans getting in exchange for this hardship? Tax cuts for billionaires and corporations that they do not need and that our country cannot afford. This is a bad deal. I urge all of my colleagues to reject this proposal. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Arizona.
Mr. Chairman, I am prepared to close, but I'd like to inquire in time.
Gentleman has 5 minutes remaining.
Mr. Chairman, I know it's painful to listen to an idiot like me for 5 minutes, but let's have some fun here. And first I want to say for everyone that's spoken, I love the passion. I love the caring. I'm just once again got to come back. So this is a reconciliation budget. It basically builds boxes. It's boxes for here's your authorization. You can go more, but you can't go less. Okay, I'm on the other side. I actually believe there should be more cuts in spending because I think we can achieve that by modernization, changing processes, the adoption of technology. Last week, I believe I was behind this very microphone, and we were showing charts of, hey, this is Medicare. How many billions and billions do we spend every year on duplicative MRI, ultrasounds, x-rays? Does that make someone healthier? Does that make them better? No. We're basically, it's waste and fraud, but the ability to use technology to get rid of that. If we all agreed to do something like that, we're going to get rid of these duplicative services. We're going to get rid of some of the, we like to say waste and fraud, but the fact of the matter is design problems in the model. You didn't cut a single service. You didn't take anything away from someone. But what you gave is my kids a chance to survive. Because part of this, look, part of this I don't like. I'm going to be brutally honest. I wish there were more cuts. I don't like the amount of borrowing here. But if this is the moment that opens up a chance for someone like myself that has spent a decade here passionately trying to say it doesn't have to be cuts, it's actually the adoption of technology. Look, I'm going to go slightly off track, and then I want to get back into the distribution. If I turn to my brothers and sisters and anyone willing to listen right now, what's the single biggest cost in our society? This is where Schweikert soaks himself in kerosene and plays with matches, Mr. Chair. Turns out it's obesity. Our brothers and sisters, we calculate over $9 trillion in additional healthcare costs over the next decade. What would happen if the left and the right actually said, we are going to fixate on the way we deliver healthcare, the way we deliver nutrition support, the way we do agriculture policy, that we are going to help our brothers and sisters be healthier. Oh, by the way, family formation, the use of healthcare, the ability to have a life. Maybe it's moments like this where we go to battle and committees that have really smart people, but armies of lobbyists outside these hallways who look at us, who stress out when we start saying, time to modernize, time to find a better, faster, more elegant way to deliver services and slow down the piling of debt. Because the math still comes back to 63% of our tax-paying brothers and sisters will see their taxes go up. Now, for the comments you've heard over and over here that the distributional effects, okay, Mr. Byer and I are both on Ways and Means, battle in the committee, saying, because remember, there is no bill, coming out of the committee yet. What's it going to look like? Do we actually have to make elegant changes? Are there things we can agree as a body that will maximize economic growth? Because at some point, you got to look, and I'm sorry I've beaten up this chart, but we've been trying to model what happens to the economy if we allow these tax hikes to come in automatically. But it turns out also the economy is benefited if we maximize how much we pay for. At the end of 10 years, and I know changing spending policy is hard, but if we were to maximize both, at the end of the decade, we're more prosperous. And Mr. Chairman, at some point that's the ultimate question here. Is prosperity moral? Is there a way we can actually do our work here where we maximize the prosperity for my 2.5-year-old, but also the person heading to retirement, to our brothers and sisters who are out there working their hearts out? There is a way. The hardest part is we're going to have to do things differently than we've done in the past. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
All time for general debate.